Hey guys, welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Friday. We've got almost every team in action here, one game in the afternoon. So there's 14 games on the night schedule. And there are a lot of options, both at pitcher and for hitting. So it's a lot to sort through, but I think we can narrow this down fairly well. I think we can get it to a pretty small core of both pitchers and hitters, especially pitching. I think there are really only 4, maybe 5 pitchers that I have too much interest in. So the best pitching play in terms of expected output tonight is clearly Max Scherzer. He's facing the Marlins on the road, so kind of a knock for not having home field advantage, but it's a park upgrade for Scherzer going into Miami. More of a pitcher's park there than in Washington. And the Marlins are really bad overall at offense. They're kind of just a bad team. They're bad against righties. They strike out a lot. It's a very, very strong matchup for Scherzer. The only issue here is his price. So independent of price, this is a no-brainer that Scherzer should score the most points of any pitcher tonight, although there are some other good pitchers in good spots. But the cost still, I don't think, is quite high enough where Scherzer isn't usable. And I think there's some value elsewhere that will make it sort of easy to fit Scherzer into lineups. So I think he's a good play tonight. Just the way the slate sets up, I think he should hit value here more often than not. Scherzer is averaging 32.7 fantasy points per game this year. So he needs 28 points to hit value, and most matchups are not as easy as facing the Marlins. So, I mean, it doesn't even seem that crazy to predict that Scherzer scores 35 plus here. Obviously, anyone can have a bad game, but I don't think Scherzer is going to be particularly chalky. It's just so many different options. So maybe he's 30 or 40% owned, but nothing too crazy like he would be on a smaller slate. So I think Scherzer is worth paying up for. He's not the pitcher that I'll have the most of, although I'm basically going to try to fit him in wherever he can fit. But I think just the way that salary works and everything, it's going to make more sense to have a few other guys a little bit more than Max Scherzer, but he is the guy that I'm most prioritizing here because one thing that's notable about very large slates is that there is a lot of value for offense just because with such a high volume of different games, there's more opportunity for cheaper value hitters to just kind of show up across the board. The $2,500 to $3,000 leadoff hitter that's not usually a starter but ends up in a lineup. Doesn't happen in a high percentage of games, but we have more games to choose from here. So there's potential for more salary-saving plugs to fit in here. The next pitcher actually kind of fits that description. Usually it's hitters that we're looking to save salary, but before getting into kind of the mid-tier and the upper tier of other pitchers, I'll just mention the punt play at pitcher that I think makes a lot of sense tonight. So Joe Musgrove is making his first start of the season. He is at home against the Cardinals, and Musgrove has had kind of a disappointing start to his career. He's pitched part of 2 seasons for the Astros, and he was not good at all as a starting pitcher. He was better as a reliever, but Musgrove has a pretty good minor league track record. He's done well, actually, in his rehab assignment. At AAA this year, he's striking out over a batter per inning, walking less than 2 guys per inning, per 9 innings. The ERA is higher, but it looks to be just bad luck with the good strikeout and walk numbers and not allowing home runs. So I think Musgrove is probably an average to slightly above average starting pitcher going forward. Maybe that's a little bit optimistic. Maybe he's a slightly below average starter, but it's a home game in the National League, and it's a pitcher's park in Pittsburgh. And Musgrove shouldn't be on a pitch count because he did have a pretty lengthy appearance in his last rehab start. So I would imagine that he is fully healthy. I don't know, maybe he only throws 80 to 90 pitches, but still that's probably enough for him to do a lot more than just hit value if he's pitching well. So at absolute min price at 4,000, there's just so much upside for that price tag where Musgrove could actually pitch 6 or 7 innings and do well against the Cardinals, who kind of just have an okay offense. I think their offense was a little bit underrated for a while. People have kind of caught on to them. The reason I was targeting Cardinals bats for so long was they were just really, really cheap. But I think this is probably just a mediocre, maybe slightly above average Cardinals offense. And they are missing Yadier Molina right now. And Musgrove does get the advantage of facing a pitcher in the lineup. So part of the reason, or I guess the main reason why he should be better than what he was with Houston is just that he has much better circumstances now outside of the AL West, which is a good hitting division. Now he's in the NL Central, better park, facing a pitcher spot. So I'm pretty high on Musgrove for tonight. I think in any lineup where you need to save salary, I'm comfortable doing that with him. So I think he's a pretty strong play. So we have Musgrove, we have Scherzer, and then Corey Kluber is definitely underpriced here. I was initially thinking of him as kind of an all-in play or close to it because 10,800 for Kluber just seems really low. And Kluber is coming off a very strong game against the Astros last time out. So he's facing the same Astros team, and this game is a home game. But it actually is, I think, a worse park going back home to Houston. And Kluber is not getting the strikeouts that he got last year. His K rate is down below 1 per inning at 8.8 per 9 innings. And his swinging strike percentage is down to only 10.7 also. So maybe we shouldn't expect Kluber to be as good as last year, but I still think the price tag is a little too low for him. The other concern is that sharps clearly seem to be on the over in this game. The total opened at 7. Now it's at 7.5. There was actually a point this morning where it was up to 8. And that's with most of the public betting on the under. So it's clearly sharp money that's driving this total up. I initially thought that this was just because Dallas Keuchel is also overrated, or he's the one here who's the most obviously overrated. But the line has moved a little bit towards the Astros too. So I'm not sure that this is just entirely about Keuchel. I think facing the Astros offense is a tough proposition, and it's not some easy matchup for Kluber. So Kluber, I think, is worth using, but I prefer Scherzer on the high end. And then if you're mixing Musgrove with Scherzer, it makes it more doable to fit Scherzer into your lineups. But Kluber is worth having at least a little bit also. I think he's kind of a decent play, but not as good of a play as I thought he was yesterday. Two more pitchers to mention. We have Noah Syndergaard kind of in the same price range. He is at 10,500, so he's a little bit cheaper than Kluber. I don't really like this matchup for Syndergaard. It's a road game in a hitter's park, and even though the Brewers strike out at an above-average rate, 24, 25%, they still have a decent offense against righties, and a lot of their numbers for this year are kind of skewed because they've had a lot of injuries they've dealt with, but they're almost all the way healthy right now. Ryan Braun's actually out of the lineup, but Kane and Yelich are in there. Travis Shaw is in there. I think it's probably an average lineup in a hitter's park, and Syndergaard has really not been economical with his pitch count. I think that's a concern here for sure. He's getting more strikeouts this year by a little bit, but he's doing it at the expense of more walks and not being able to pitch as deep into games. He had a longer start last time out at home against the Diamondbacks where he went 7 innings, but he didn't have that high of a strikeout game, and the Diamondbacks against righties are also a much easier matchup than the Brewers are against righties. That was a home game too, so I wouldn't read too much into Syndergaard going deeper in the game last time out. I think this is still a real concern for him where he's throwing the ball less in the strike zone, and I think he's kind of a fade for me tonight. I think there's a case for him. I think he's a fringy play, but I don't really see that price having too much value. I'll say there's upside here, but I think the downside is significant enough that I'd rather use other pitchers. So I just prefer Kluber for the same price, and I think it's worth just going up to Scherzer for that security. So I don't really like Syndergaard all that much for today. And then the other pitcher that certainly is worth talking about, and I think he is someone who is worth having in lineups, even though I didn't really think of him initially. Ross Stripling is priced at 7,200 at home against the Padres. So that's kind of too cheap of a price for anyone at home against the Padres. But Stripling has been really, really good this year, and he's coming off 2 incredibly strong outings. The last one was on the road against Washington, where he struck out 9 batters in 6 innings. He had a good start against the Reds the time out before that. And Stripling kind of seemed like a mediocre prospect. He was pretty good as a reliever before this year, but for whatever reason, he's just been way better this year, both as a starter and as a reliever. This still seems like a little bit high of a price for him, just given the quality of pitcher that he is. But I think it probably makes sense to update our idea of what Ross Stripling is, because he's been so good this year, and it's a fairly decent sample size with 3 starts and a bunch of relief appearances, and it's also just such an easy matchup against the Padres. So Stripling, I think, has some value, and I think he's probably my 3rd favorite pitcher to target tonight, probably 4th. So the guy I want the most of is Scherzer, followed by Musgrove, and then I think Kluber for his price is a little bit better of a play than Stripling. But it's those 4 pitchers. I think that's the core that I want to stick with. There are some other good choices. There are 28 teams playing tonight, so you can make a case for a lot of different guys. Like, you can make a case for James Paxton. I don't actually think Severino is a good play. It's a tough matchup. But you can obviously make a case for Syndergaard. There really aren't too many, though. Those 2 guys on the high end, I think, just missed the cut for me, and maybe including Syndergaard or Paxton in just a few lineups where they fit, maybe that's okay to do. But I am not actively targeting those 2 guys, and there's no other cheap pitcher that I really like either. Just Musgrove for cheap, Stripling for mid-price, Kluber a little bit higher than that, and then Scherzer on the high end. So offense is a little bit harder to pin down, but I think there were a lot of good spots tonight. The first obvious and very good spot is the Rockies against Sal Romano in Coors Field. So it's pretty warm in Colorado now. It's Colorado, it's Coors Field, so the ball's always flying out of there. The issue is that the Rockies offense is bad, but Sal Romano is pretty bad too, and the ball is going to be put in play against him. He doesn't really get strikeouts at all. Blackmon and Arenado are priced in their usual range in the mid-5,000s. I think that there's always value on them against a bad pitcher in Coors Field. So I like them. I think Rockies stacks overall are good plays. David Dahl's a little cheap at 4,200. Carlos Gonzalez is not in the lineup tonight, but we have Gerardo Parra batting 4th at 3,900. The 2 Rockies I like the least by a lot are Trevor Story at 4,700 because he doesn't hit righties all that well. He is substantially better against lefties. And then Ian Desmond just kind of sucks against everybody. He's batting 6th. He costs 4,000. So I might want to limit it to a 1 through 4 Rocky stack with Arenado, Blackmon, Parra, and Dahl. But I think Pat Valaika at 3,000 batting 8th, and then Tony Wolters at 2,700 batting 7th. Those aren't good hitters, especially Wolters is one of the worst hitting catchers in the league, but those are such cheap prices for anyone playing at Coors Field and facing Sal Romano. So I actually prefer Valaika and Wolters to Story and Desmond. But the Rockies overall, I think it's worth having a lot of Charlie Blackmon and Nolan Arenado. I think the stacks make sense. So that is the offense that I'm the highest on for tonight. I think they should score the most runs. The other team in contention there for expected output is the Red Sox. And Julio Teheran started the season pretty strong, but he also did it throwing slower. And it seemed a little bit gimmicky to me at the time. He's had some very bad outcomes recently. So I'm just going to make, but it seems like we're back to the prior year's version of Teheran where he just isn't putting up good results. He's not getting as many swing and misses as he did to start the season, although his swinging strike percentage is up to 11% from last year. But it was in the 12s just a couple starts ago, so it's dropped in the last few starts. Teheran probably is not as bad as he was last season, where he had a 495 FIP and a 496 xFIP, but he does have a 503 FIP and a 483 xFIP this year, so I'm not really sure if that's even fair to say. Teheran might just be very bad again. The thing he's doing better is getting more swinging strikes, but he's also getting less ground balls. He is throwing the ball in the strike zone less often, so I think he was getting more chases on pitches earlier on. He definitely benefited from some strong matchups. He faced the Mets and the Phillies. There were some other easier games here early on. Phillies, Nationals twice, but he didn't really pitch too well in those games. And the Phillies again, the Mets, the Phillies again. Teheran has faced the Phillies 3 times this year, the Mets twice, and the Rays once. And he had faced the Nationals twice earlier in the season where he gave up 7 runs in those 2 starts. So Teheran's, all of his success actually this year has come against bad offenses. And then his last 2 starts, he got kind of blown up by the Cubs for 4 runs, 2 homers in 6 innings where he only got 1 strikeout. And then he had a 6-run outing against the Marlins last start. So outside of these Phillies and Mets starts, which, yeah, they count for something, but those are clearly very easy matchups. Julio Teheran has not been a good pitcher this year, and his overall numbers are not good. So I think this is a really strong matchup for the Red Sox. It's a wind blowing out at Fenway game also. So the Red Sox are expensive. That's really the only issue here, because this is by all accounts a very, very good spot for them. I actually don't think they'll have very much ownership tonight. But it's just kind of hard to fit all of these hitters in. So if you want to make Red Sox stacks that include Scherzer, you basically need to have Musgrove as the second pitcher, and you can't use all of their 1 through 5. But I think that's fine anyway, because I think Rafael Devers is actually the best value on Boston tonight. He bats from the left side of the plate. Teheran is usually way worse against lefties, and Devers is only 3,400. So I would try to include him in almost every Red Sox stack. And if you leave off, let's say, Xander Bogaerts and put in Devers, it does give you a little more wiggle room to use some cheaper value plays and play Scherzer and Musgrove with Red Sox stacks. You can leave off any other Red Sox player too if you're making multiple lineups. But Devers is the priority for me from Boston, but I think everyone on the Red Sox is a good play. 5,900 seems like a lot for Mookie Betts, but he is over a 200 WRC plus against both righties and lefties this season. So he may just be good enough that it doesn't really matter what his price is. Any good matchup, he's worth playing. So the Red Sox and the Rockies, I think, are the two teams with the highest expected outputs. The Rockies are a little bit cheaper, actually, so I slightly prefer them. But the Red Sox should have lower ownership, so I think that helps also. And then we've got some other teams here in the mid-range. There was one more thing I realized while I was talking about offense there that I wanted to mention from the pitching intro. For Syndergaard. So the over-under for the Mets-Brewers game opened at 7.5 and kind of close to 7, actually. And it's now jumped all the way to 8.5. It's been an entire run that the total has gone up. And that's with 67% of the bets actually on the under. So sharper bettors are all over the over in this game. And the betting line for the two sides actually hasn't changed. It's kind of 50-50 betting on the game. The Mets open at -115. They're still -115. It really does look like a half-run implied boost for the run totals for both the Brewers and the Mets. So sharper betting against Syndergaard. It's also against Junior Guerra, but this is definitely a downgrade for Syndergaard based on the line movement. And then the line movement tonight, that's the strongest by so much. It's really incredible. The Blue Jays opened at +120 and are now -110, so it's a 30-cent line move, and that's with only 34% of bets on Toronto. The over-under for the game has also gone up a little bit too. It opened at somewhere between 8.5 and 9, and it's now 9, kind of trending up to 9.5, and the over-under split is about 50-50. So sharps are very much on the Blue Jays. I think most of this is for the Toronto offense. So I do like the Blue Jays as a stack tonight. Zach Eflin is probably he's pretty hard to figure out right now. So the deal with Eflin is that last year he was as bad as any pitcher in the league in 11 starts, where he had a 6.16 ERA, 6.10 FIP, 5.21 xFIP. This year he's throwing harder, though, and it's translated to a 1.56 ERA. He's striking out almost a batter per inning, but his 3 starts this year have come against the Marlins, the Giants, and the Cardinals. So 3 pretty good matchups, and he had most of his success, I think, in those first 2. He wasn't particularly good last time out against the Cardinals. Eflin has a 293 FIP, 432 xFIP, though, and he's giving up a lot of fly balls, 23% ground ball rate. So I think the home run upside against Eflin is certainly there, and I think it's especially there for the lefties in the Blue Jays offense. Because of the unpredictable nature of someone like Eflin, we just don't know what he is right now completely, because he's pitching so much differently than last year with the velocity increase. I think he's still bad, but there's definitely some uncertainty there. I don't know how much I like the Blue Jays for plugs, because it kind of seems like an all-or-nothing game where Eflin might be really bad, or he might just be better than I think he is, and maybe it's not worth having Blue Jays in lineups as plugs in that case. But Toronto's definitely cheap enough to stack. Donaldson is actually their only hitter priced above 4,000. It's a pretty decent offense against righties. They're kind of middle of the pack, and they certainly have home run upside. Granderson, Donaldson, Smoke. I think Tasker Hernandez is still underrated, and Yangervis Solarte has been really good this year. So the thing I really like about the Blue Jays as a stack is that they're a very top-heavy offense. Kevin Pillar, Russell Martin, Gio Urshela, and the pitcher spot, obviously the pitcher spot, not as scary of a bottom of the order. So it kind of just makes sense to use 1 through 5 Blue Jays. They're reasonably priced. You can fit them with basically any pitching combination. I don't have a feel for ownership here kind of at all. I don't know if people are on the Blue Jays, but I'm kind of going with the sharp money here. With the uncertainty of Eflin, I'm kind of trusting the line movement. And I think the Blue Jays should do well tonight. But I don't know how much I want of them as plugs. I think just for stacking, it's definitely a high upside stack. All right, let's see. So there are a couple more offenses that I think are worth talking about. All right, so we've got who else? Who else? Just have to scan through all these games because it's even hard to remember. Okay, so we have this game in Texas between the Royals and Rangers. That was the next game I wanted to talk about. The over-under is actually dropped from 10 down to 9.5 in that game. And it's a little bit of sharp money on the under, it seems like. I think both offenses are just kind of overrated, especially the Rangers offense, and especially against lefties. Texas is terrible against lefties, and they strike out a lot against them too. It looks like the sharper money is on the Royals side. But I do still like both offenses in this game. It's just that the Rangers are so cheap, and even though I don't think it's that good of a spot for them, well, it's a good spot. I just think they're bad, but they're also pretty underpriced, especially, well, a couple of the guys. So Delano DeShields, 3,400 in the leadoff spot, I think is a good value. I think Isaiah Keener-Falefa is a good value, batting third at 3,500. He has 2-position eligibility. I think Profar is a good play. I think Chirinos is a good play. I think Gallo is worth using. But I think the price tags on Chu and Mazzara are a little high. So I don't know. I don't have a ton of interest in the Rangers, but I think where they fit, they're kind of fine. It's hot in Texas, and when it's hot in Texas, the park plays more to hitters, but the wind is also blowing in pretty strongly from center field. So maybe that's part of the reason why the over-under went down. But I also think the Royals on the other side of this game against Mike Minor are in a good spot. The Royals are actually a pretty decent offense against lefties. Lucas Duda being out of the lineup doesn't really hurt them against lefties. He sits fairly often against left-handed pitching anyway. But the Royals kind of have the same thing going as the Blue Jays, where they are very top-heavy, and you know, for the most part, where the run production is coming from when you stack them. So Merrifield, Moustakas, Perez, Soler, and John Jay, even against the lefty, is cheap enough in the leadoff spot that I think stacking Royals 1 through 5 makes some sense too. So I just have kind of mild interest in this game. I like the Rockies more. I like the Red Sox more. I like the Blue Jays more. But I think these two teams are fine. And then I have another team kind of in this category also, and that's the Tampa Bay Rays against David Hess. Hess might be the worst pitcher that's pitching tonight, but the Rays offense just isn't that good, and it's also a pitcher's park. But it's probably still worth using them because of their pricing and because David Hess isn't good. Joey Wendell's 3,000 batting third. Brad Miller is 3,200. I think those guys are the best plays, but Rays stacks probably make some sense. I don't really like that price on CJ Cron at 4,300. So the Rays could end up just being better plugs, I think. But I think it's a stack that's maybe worth having if you have multiple lineups. If you have a lot of lineups, maybe include them in a small percentage. I kind of feel similarly about the Pirates against John Gant. So I guess that's offense number 7. The Pirates are kind of similarly priced to the Rays, and John Gant is bad. So it's a very similar situation to Tampa for Pittsburgh. Let's see. Who else do we have? That might be it. Just 7 offenses. Yeah, not too many. But those first 3 are the ones that I think are the strongest priorities. The wind is blowing out at Yankee Stadium, so I guess I'll mention the other games where wind is helping. I think the Yankees are a little too expensive to stack, and I think Andrew Heaney is too good of a pitcher to stack against. But I think Stanton, because of how good he is, I mean, Giancarlo Stanton can hit a home run against anyone at any time, but he's also a lot better against lefties. So I think Stanton makes sense. I think Sanchez makes sense where you can fit him. But Stanton's the priority from the Yankees. I think he's a good plug. The wind is helping in Philly, so that's part of the reason why there's a boost to the over-under in that game. So I like the Philly side of the game also a little bit, although that sharp money is concerning. But Rhys Hoskins at 4,000 is cheap, and Nick Williams batting 6th at 3,000. I think that's a little too cheap because Sam Gaviglio is not a good pitcher. So who else do we have? The White Sox and Tigers game is mildly interesting, but the wind is blowing in Detroit, and that is a fairly strong pitcher's park. So not much interest in the Tigers-White Sox game. All right, let's figure out what's going on with this Tampa lineup because apparently Denard Span has been traded. Okay, stand by. I'm going to figure out. I'm going to pause this for a second. Actually, can stay on. Look up Denard Span. Just bear with me here where I find out where Denard Span has gone to and who's starting in his place. But the Rays stack probably doesn't change too much because of this in terms of their output, because Denard Span isn't some great hitter. I would imagine that Malik Smith moves up in the lineup. He's about the same price, but he's more of a stolen base threat. So maybe it's actually a better stack now. Yeah, we'll need to wait and see how Tampa changes their lineup around. I don't know who Span was traded for. They traded Alex Colomé too. That's probably a good thing. He's a very bad closer. And both of them are going to the Mariners. No return has been announced. So yeah, I think that if Malik Smith moves up to the leadoff spot, you can really think of the stack the same as you did before. With Smith up there over Span, I don't really think it changes much of anything with the Rays stack. I think it's just kind of okay still. And then, yeah, that White Sox Tigers game, I think the wind hurts too much to really target the game, but Victor Martinez at first base is pretty cheap for 3,100. The White Sox aren't really that cheap. It's a pretty bad offense with Wellington Castillo and Matt Davidson out, even against Mike Fiers. But I think Abreu is a fine play. Moncada, maybe a little too expensive for tonight. And then Nick Castellanos, I think, is a good play too. He's just a better hitter than 4K. I think he's just a little bit underpriced there. The Braves are mildly interesting against Eduardo Rodriguez, but I think with so many good choices, they just kind of missed the cut. They're also not cheap. Kurt Suzuki, though, I think is a good catcher play at 3,200, batting 5th against a lefty. The only reason really to have interest in the Braves, because Eduardo Rodriguez is good, it's because the wind is blowing out at Fenway and it's warm tonight. The Braves also are better against left-handed pitching, but I think Suzuki and probably Acuna too at 4,200. I think those are the best plays from Atlanta. I think they just make sense as plugs. I think some Mets bats make sense for cheap. If you want to be really contrarian, stack the Brewers against Syndergaard because the sharp money there is clearly on the over. And if Syndergaard just happens to have a short outing, which is not all that unlikely, the Mets did have to burn through a lot of their bullpen last night, and they don't really have a deep bullpen. They have some good pitchers in there, but I think it's kind of a mediocre bullpen that just has a couple guys who have been good on the back end. But the Brewers stack is going to be very, very contrarian. So maybe one of those out of 20 lineups, that might even be a little bit of a reach. Other offenses that I think are worth mentioning, the Reds, I think, are just a little expensive, but I think they're okay. Jesse Winker and Tucker Barnhart at the top of the order. I'd rather play Suzuki at catcher, and if you're going to pay 3,900, I'd rather use Salvador Perez. So I don't have too much interest in the Reds as plugs. And I think that's pretty much going to do it. I'm going to check again for this Rays lineup, see if anything has come out on that front, and maybe some later lineups that we haven't seen yet. All right. Doesn't look like any news from the later games. Paul Goldschmidt is priced down to 3,900 against a lefty. I think that's a good price for him. I don't have interest in that game otherwise, but I think Goldschmidt is cheap enough. He's been bad this year, but he's still been fine against lefties. Let's see. Still seeing Denard Span. I don't think the Rays have made an update to their lineup yet. So, yeah, I think assuming Malik Smith is in the leadoff spot makes sense to me, but we'll have to check that before lock. So just to summarize, Scherzer is my favorite pitcher, although it's kind of unrealistic to use him too much. The guys that fit in with him, or I can try to fit in with them, Kluber, Musgrove, and Stripling. I think the order of exposure there would be Musgrove, then Kluber, then Stripling. But those 4 pitchers, try to mix them around with Rockies offense, the Red Sox offense, although they're expensive. Devers makes the stack a lot cheaper. He's batting 6th. I think the Blue Jays are a pretty good upside stack. And then there are several other teams. I guess go back and listen to the explanations on the other teams. But those are my top 3 offenses. There are a bunch that are worth using. I may just make one stack of each of these other teams. But those are the 3 that are the focus. So hopefully that covered everything that you guys wanted to know about for tonight. Yep, that's going to do it. All right, good luck, everybody. And I don't know the schedule yet for this weekend, so I'll keep you posted on if anything is coming up this weekend for YouTube shows.